Hello, everyone. I'm Miss Jian, and today we will talk about the influence of culture, biology, and gender in shaping behavior. Our content for today's lecture are the following: universal human behaviors, evolutionary psychology foundations, cultural norms and social machinery, gender similarities and differences. So let's begin. First, let me ask you, how are we influenced by human nature and cultural diversity? It's funny, Kai, we are dealing with a paradox. On one hand, we're all remarkably similar. So every single person in this room shares common ancestors from Africa who lived over 100,000 years ago. So we're genetically more similar to each other than almost any other species on Earth. So natay mga universal behaviors such as we use language, for example, kitang tanan tao, right? And then we also all form social groups and we all show similar emotional expressions. So if we are happy, our lips turn upward, right? If we're angry, magmeet ang atong eyebrows. We also tell stories and we have similar moral responses. Pero on the other hand, we show incredible cultural diversity too. So for example, sa food palang daan, di ba we all need to eat. That's the human universal. But what we consider delicious versus disgusting varies wildly across cultures. So look at this one. This is from a guy named Ian Robertson. So he said here, right? Americans eat oysters but not snails. The French eat snails but not locusts. The Zulus eat locusts but not fish. The Jews eat fish but not pork. The Hindus eat pork but not beef, and the Russians eat beef but not snakes. The Chinese eat snakes but not people, and I don't know how to pronounce this, of Guinea find people delicious. And we have cannibalistic societies that eat people. So that precisely shows our eating preferences, shows our cultural diversity. In Thailand, they eat snakes and scorpions too, the same as in China. Our shared human biology is actually what enables our cultural diversity. So evolution didn't just give us fixed behaviors, it gave us the capacity to learn and adapt to any culture we're born into. So, in the end, we're simultaneously the most genetically similar and the most culturally diverse species on the planet. In short, we're both remarkably similar and strikingly different. So, let me give you some concrete examples of just how similar we all are. So, example, babies. Now, they show moral intuitions before they can even walk. And there was a study that um, researchers concluded, and they found out that moral dilemmas to people from completely different cultures who have never met each other show remarkable agreement about what's right and what's wrong. And we also all prefer living with others rather than alone. We form families and communities. We create hierarchies. We return favors and punish people who wrong us. All humans do that. And around 8 months of age, babies everywhere, no matter in Japan or US or in the Philippines, they start showing fear of strangers. And each one of us, we all favor members of our own groups. And even our entertainment is universal. Mga Greek tragedies, Chinese fiction, mga Mexican soap operas. Example, this one, right? Coco, Modern Family, and Four Sisters and a Wedding. They are from different cultures, but they all share a message about a family, familial support and sacrifice. And this indicates that even though we're from different countries and from different cultures, there are similar patterns appearing everywhere, even though we don't have contact. And it suggests that these universals arise from our biological similarity and not from cultural learning. So they are species typical patterns that emerge because of how our brains are built. O nga maning naamantay mga universal patterns. Ato ning tawag og universal patterns. So in order to answer this question, let's move on to our next section, which is foundations of evolutionary psychology. And evolutionary psychology offers one explanation why we share similarities. Ang basic idea aning evolutionary psychology is natural selection. Mo ng pinaka-biggest proposition. Natural selection shape not just our physical traits, but our psychological ones too. How many pag-work? Let's break it down. So say, for example, organisms, ani, have varied offspring. Naadayo competition for survival in any environment. And there will be variations of gene expressions for higher chances of reproduction. Ang successful traits that will allow for survival and adaptability, it gets passed on to the next generation. And over time, because there are changes in how genes are passed on and how genes are expressed based on the most adaptive trait, then the population changes. So we carry what David Buss calls the psychological legacy of our ancestors' adaptive preferences. Ang emotions and behaviors that help our ancestors survive became universal human nature. So it explains some puzzling things about modern life. Like nganong mahadlok man tag mga bitin or strangers compared to climate change or processed food, they're equally deadly. Because according to evolutionary psychology, our brains evolved to detect ancestral dangers and not modern ones. Also, nga nung mag-crave man tag sugar and fatty food. Because back then, these were scarce resource and it's very crucial for survival sa ato mga ancestors. And even negative emotions, anxiety, loneliness, depression, all serve adaptive functions. They motivate us to cope with survival challenges. Pero, plus, listen carefully, there is a very important caveat. Evolutionary psychology describes tendencies. They are not fixed destinies. What does this mean? Kung sa gingon sa evolutionary side, it doesn't mean that we take on the notion na, igani na ta forever. No. Okay, it just describes or tries to come up with an explanation why a certain behavior or trait is existing up to this day. Probably, for lack of a better word, science is kulang of theories informing such explanation. So they go way beyond. Understanding our evolved tendencies and from evolutionary psychology now, propositions can actually help us make better choices about how to live in the modern world. So in the previous slide, we positioned evolutionary psychology propositions as basis for explaining why we humans share similarities. Now let's talk about culture and its influence in human behavior and attitudes. So if genes are like our cerebral hard drive, then culture is like the software we run on it. So we have same hardware, completely different programs. So humans are on a much looser genetic leash compared sa ubang species. We're prepared to learn whatever culture we're born into with extraordinarily. So say a baby born in Japan can learn to be or to function how a perfect Japanese is, while the other baby, the twin sa kaning Japanese baby, by blood is the baby is still Japanese, but when they're raised in Brazil, then they can be very adaptive to Brazilian culture and be perfectly Brazilian. So culture is not just surface differences like clothing or food. What is culture? Culture are shared ideas, attitudes, behaviors, mga traditions that gets transmitted across generations, and they deeply shape how we think and behave. So think about punctuality, for example. Some cultures expect precise timing, while others are more flexible. Personal space is another thing that you could come up with. So when talking versus, how close you stand when talking is very different per culture. And expressiveness as well. So some cultures encourage emotional expression, while others value restraint. So Roy Baumeister captured this perfectly. Evolution made us for culture. We evolved the capacity to be cultural beings. And it's not nature versus nurture. We're done with that debate. We're really done with that debate. It's nature and nurture constantly interacting. So the same biological capacity can produce radically different outcomes based on cultural input. So it's like having the same computer but running completely different software programs. So in this next slide, let's talk about norms. So unsa din ang norms? Let me give you first a textbook definition of what norm is. So cultural norms are the societal or social expectations about appropriate behavior that creates the social machinery. They're oftentimes invisible till someone violates them or until someone from another culture is not following them. That's why we have the norm violation experiment for us to be aware of the norms that we have. But we probably can't feel what we're doing because we're so immersed in it. So these norms, they enable smooth social interaction and they reduce uncertainty and conflict and allow groups to coordinate their behavior. That's what norms are there, or rather, why norms are existing in the first place. So if you're in a place, a theater, everyone knowing their lines is kind of like akin to a norm played out in a society. So when everybody knows their lines, it reduces the unpredictability of social situations. And we don't usually notice our cultural norms. Muratag isda ba in the water. We don't notice the water. Pero when we encounter different norms, say we go to another country and then realize the Thai people say sawadika, right? Then bow their heads. Suddenly we become aware of our own assumptions about what's considered normal or what's a normal behavior. Pero these norms, they vary dramatically across cultures. So say mga Mediterranean cultures, they tend to be warm and very expressive, while Northern European cultures are more formal and reserved. Germany or Switzerland, they value time. If they say we meet at 8 a.m., we meet at 8 a.m. Precise timing dapat. While sa Latin American cultures, remember, and that includes Spain as well, Mexico, and Philippines, because we're conquered by Spain and we've inherited some of their culture as well. More flexible approaches to time. So, makanotice mo sa kung na event, i-1 hour ano nila in advance sa kanang invitation. Kaya magsugod day to ang real time, say 5 p.m. Sa invitation, buta nila 4 p.m. because of this kind of culture. And cultures near the equator prefer less personal space and more touching, while northern cultures prefer greater distance. And if you're curious as to why, we have studies and mga theories na theorization why this is so. For example, I'm just going to give you a snippet of the theory that was formed why cultures near the equator are more comfortable with lesser personal space is because of the climate na theory na because these countries near the equator normally experiences warm climate, so it encourages going outside more, being social, and that creates the preference for lesser personal space and more touching. And another daghang theories put another theory of ani is for pathogen control something, right? Because it's paradox, right? Na anong mag ganahan ako kog lesser space if I don't want to inherit any disease. Pero there has been found that naa siya contributions to thermoregulation and, well, social support increases one's immune system. So that could be one. A lot of theories come into play. But as always, abstract concepts like the one we're studying has a lot of nuances. So we can't say for sure that that's the reason why. Going back, there's even something called the broken windows effect. When people see visible norm violations, they're more likely to violate other norms themselves. So remember when I first introduced the subject to you, I mentioned cultural tightness. So kaning cultural tightness is the measure of how strictly norms are enforced, how strictly norms are enforced in a certain country. So say Japan is very tight in their culture. They are very high in cultural tightness. And Brazil is kind of low in their cultural tightness. Philippines is in the middle. So nga naman what could be the reason of the spectrum man? There are cultures or countries na high in cultural tightness and there are countries with low cultural tightness. And researchers, sociologists, cross-cultural psychologists pointed out through the threats experienced by the country. They found a relationship na ang countries na mostly experiences a lot of disasters or tragedies in their history in the past are more tight in their in their cultural norms. Because if your norms are strictly enforced, it creates order and predictability. And remember, these countries faced a lot of tragedy, so they need that in their country. Pero despite all this surface diversity, naa may deep similarities underneath. When researchers study friendship norms across cultures, they find universals like respecting privacy, maintaining eye contact, and keeping confidences. The variations are in details. So maglalahi lang siya sa sa like detailed ano. For example, rules about public criticism. So friendship cultures or friendship norms are okay with being publicly criticized in front of somebody, but other friendship norms does not really are is does not allow that, for lack of a better word. Ang big five personality dimension. They, di ba you've encountered this one already in your theories of personality. The big five, the ocean, is stable across cultures or across 49 countries because the budget can't examine all countries existing in the world. So how stable you are, how outgoing, open, agreeable, and conscientious you are actually show up in 49 countries. And the national differences are actually smaller than stereotypes suggest. And a study across 38 countries found universal social beliefs about cynicism, social complexity, reward for hard work, spirituality, and fate control. And here's the key finding, class. Ang individual differences within cultures are greater than differences between cultures. Tanang culture also have formal and informal ways of addressing people. Like example sa Korea, di ba? To be formal, they always put like honorifics at the end. And the same for Japan as well. And sa Philippines, ari nakakita og student mo address og prof or doc religiously. Like, mura sila makasala if they call a teacher by their first name. And well, in other countries, they don't care if you don't include the title. Like the West, they always say their names on a first name basis. So, ako ang personal example na is when I was working in the industry and our CEO is Filipino, pero or she wants to adopt a Western culture. And she wants to be addressed using her name directly. So that's an example of she's a Filipino, she's in a Filipino country that's very high in this kind of distinction of formal and formal ways of addressing people, and she wants to adopt a Western way of doing so. And that's individual variation at play. And another example, higher status person always initiates the switch to intimacy. So pertaining na siya sa kanang status differences, for example, your boss will always be the first to invite you sa iyang house first before you invite your boss to their house. And same po na sa relationship, the one who defines the relationship, kanang mo DTR, example, if situationship pa mo, is said to be the one that has higher status, kanang mo defines a relationship. And all these reveals unconscious social hierarchies that is existing everywhere. And another universal pattern is ang incest taboo. It's universal despite occasional violators or violations. We can see it in probably sa probinsya. It's very kanang taboo if you marry your cousin or your even parinti lang, di ba? Like third degree cousin. Very taboo yun na sa ilang class where in fact I think it's okay not to marry your third, fourth degree, right? I'm not sure. Pero it's taboo there in the province. And this incest taboo that's universal also has a biological basis. Kay in the past, when the monarchy marry with their and produce offspring with their cousins and their brothers or sisters, it always has genetic penalties kaning inbreeding. So that's why it's taboo ang incest sa virtually all culture. And kaning tanang universal patterns, it suggests biological underpinnings, while the variations show cultural influences layered on top. So next, let's talk about gender and how our gender norms influence our thoughts and actions. But before we talk about gender differences, we need to establish the foundation first. Ang foundation nato is that males and females are overwhelmingly similar. For simplicity's sake and discussion's sake, I will be referring to men as males and women as females. Para simple ang natong wording. And the examples here, remember, ang studies that we have right now is largely Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic countries. That also includes, in terms of gender orientation, we're more hetero, right? The research that we have right now is the siya study on the hetero relationship. We don't have so much studies pa sa kanang gays. So keep that in mind when we're discussing concepts here. What might be average for hetero relationships might not be the same as gay couples. So we have 45 out of 46 chromosomes that are identical. We reach similar developmental milestones like sitting, walking, talking at the same ages, and we show similar psychological traits. Our vocabulary, our creativity, intelligence, self-esteem, happiness, and see height Janet Hyde reviewed 46 meta-analyses comparing males and females and found na gender similarity and not difference is the norm. So our brains look similar, we feel the same emotions and longings, we both dote on children, and we're both capable of the full range of human behavior. So, nanuman na ang differences noon ang naka-attract og more attention. Because differences excite our interests more than similarities. There have, for as simple as that, we're more excited sa differences nato. There have been over 18,000 studies comparing males and females, and the media focuses on differences. They don't focus on similarities because that's what captures attention. Pero, although we're very similar, men and women, there are still differences that do exist and they also matter. But then again, they occur against a backdrop of overwhelming similarity. It's like focusing on the gamay na variations in a symphony while ignoring that, well, it's fundamentally the same music. So with that foundation established, let's look at some documented differences. By in this next few slides, which is a lot of slides, there will be a lot of studies highlighting the differences. Although bear in mind that again, we're more similar than we're different. So one consistent pattern na nag-involve sa gender differences is the independence versus connectedness. You can see this in childhood play. Girls tend toward smaller groups with intimate talk and less aggression, while boys gravitate to larger groups that are activity focused and more competitive. Also, in adult friendships, women describe themselves in more relational terms, and women's conversations are longer, they text more frequently, and they share more personal information. And both sexes, when they were surveyed, they actually report that women's friendships are more intimate and nurturing. And when stressed, men tend toward fight or flight responses, while women tend toward tend and befriend, seeking support from their peers. In career choices, men gravitate more toward jobs that enhance inequalities. Sample, prosecutor, corporate advertising, while women, they gravitate toward jobs that reduce inequalities, like public defender, charity work. Women also tend to value relationships and helping others more. Men tend to value earnings, power, and challenge more. Women maintain family connections across generations more. So women are found to buy more gifts, they write more letters, they make more calls to extended family. And that's the difference between men and women. But remember, these are statistical tendencies. They're not absolute rules. There are a lot of, again, time and time again, there are a lot of individual variations that don't fit these patterns at all. Another documented difference involves empathy and emotional recognition. So, mga babae, therefore, more likely to describe themselves as empathetic, to rejoice with those who weep. Laboratory studies also back this up. Girls react with more empathy to emotional stories and images. Women express more empathy for others' suffering, and brain imaging also shows women's empathy circuits are more active. And in 2003, 43% of women versus 12% of men cried over the Iraq War, according to Gallup polling. Judith Hall analyzed 125 studies and found women superior at decoding others' emotional messages. They're better at reading facial expressions, body language, and vocal tones, and they're also better at recalling others' appearance. Women are also more skilled at expressing emotions non-verbally, especially mga positive emotions. Although, according sa studies na nakitaan sa laboratory, is that men are slightly better at conveying anger. Both men and women prefer friendships with women when they need emotional support. Kay women's skills may contribute to kaning mga skills sa women by detecting emotion, empathy. It contributes to traditional caregiving roles. Though high status people of any gender are actually less accurate at reading emotions, perhaps because they don't need to pay as much attention to others' feelings. Also, social dominance patterns have been found to have gender differences. Cross-culturally, men are rated as more dominant, driven, and aggressive. So, according to studies, ang mga lucky daw, they're also more likely to value power and achievement. And this shows up kind of like sa naming, right? Di ba mag-una jud ang name or title sa mga lucky. Sample, King and Queen, Mr. and Mrs. And leadership statistics are also striking. 19% of world's legislators are women, and 90% of jury leaders are men. 87% of top UK company board positions are held by men, and there's a gender wage gap where women earn 70 to 90% of men's wages globally. And I've seen this put in my job before. Okay, motong is one of the reasons why I also quit class. Kay, I'm doing a lot of work. I have no rest, and the people that I work with, men, they're just sitting scrolling sa Facebook, and they earn twice my salary. Damn, yeah. So we still have, to this day and age, 2025, 2024, we still have a gender wage gap. Our communication styles differ too. Men show more autocratic, directive leadership, while women show more democratic, transformational leadership. And you can also observe, I mean, studies also found that men are more likely to interrupt, talk assertively, and maintain eye contact. And women use more indirect influence and qualified language. Men take more risks, and one study found male stockbrokers made 45% more trades than women, and men are more overconfident in their abilities. Pero this overconfidence actually led to poorer investment returns. And then again, a caveat: context matters enormously. Style differences vary with social situations and status, and individual variation is huge. Leadership preferences may depend on the situation, so we might prefer different styles during wartime versus peacetime. So for wartime, we might need leaders na kanang directive, autocratic, kung cumulus times or the country is threatened. For peaceful time, we might need leaders that are transformational and democratic. All right, now let's turn to aggression. And are there gender differences in aggression? So let's go back first sa evolutionary side. Kay, di ba, when we say, I mean, not even in evolutionary side, even up to this day, mga hobbies that includes hunting, fishing, or warring, they're primarily male activities. And this also is reflected sa mga laboratories. Kay men also admit to more aggression in surveys, and they also administer more electric shocks sa mga laboratory studies. If you look at the archival data or the statistics, ang murder arrest ratio is 8 to 9 men to 1 woman in Canada, and sa US as well. And sa US prisoners, 92% are male. And you can also observe this, diba, in the Philippines. You see that the prisoners are more, a lot of the prisoners there are men compared to women. Although I could not retrieve a data on Philippine statistics about the murder arrest ratio. So that's one thing to consider. And the study here is largely anchored on Western studies. I want to keep on repeating that reminder, kay maybe there will be tendencies for us to generalize it to our own culture, where we might show a different data as compared to what is depicted in our Western countries. So it's bear that in mind, Jud, always. And why did I mention that? Context is very important. And this doesn't just involve the cultural context or differences in cultures or countries. This also involves into how aggression is manifested. Okay, when genders, both of them, men and women, when they're provoked, the gender gap shrinks significantly in terms of aggression. In one study, women equal men in verbal aggression and throwing objects and slapping. Pero what they found is that yes, there might not be gender differences, or might be there might be very little gender gap in aggression or levels of aggression. So meaning women is equally as aggressive as men, pero in terms of its expression, they differ. Kay men might succumb more likely to physical aggression, while women are more likely to commit indirect aggression like gossip, social exclusion, nalibak ba? And in terms of development sa aggression, the differences sa men and women, they appear very early before much cultural influence could occur. And as men and women grow old, they decline with age. So meaning magkagamay ang gender gap sa aggression or levels of aggression as people age. Ang insight here is that physical aggression shows the largest gender differences. Pero ang other forms of aggression show small or no differences at all. And both biological and cultural factors likely contribute, and individual differences within each gender are very big. So we also need to be careful about research methods, okay? Kaning mga laboratory findings, kaning mga experimental studies, they're in a controlled environment. So what might be observed in a laboratory could not be generalized to real life or real world behavior where a lot of factors come into play na. So cultural definitions puts aggression, they vary, and research has been biased towards studying male typical forms of aggression. One thing to keep in mind. Okay? And then, of course, we have the sexuality and mating behavior. There are documented differences in sexuality and mating behavior. So in Australia, 48% of men versus 12% of women say they're comfortable with casual sex. And this pattern is consistent across 48 nations that was studied. And men report also stronger sex drive. And they also think more frequently about sex and have more sexual thoughts. Behaviorally, so there is an examination of thoughts or cognition. And behaviorally, men are also more likely to initiate sexual activity worldwide. Now, interestingly, gay men versus lesbians show similar patterns as well. There are more coupled lesbians than gay men. And men desire more sexual partners, more variety in their partners, and more visual stimuli. Whereas women are more likely to cite affection as their reason for their first intercourse. So these patterns, they all appear across all cultures studied. The countries that were involved in the study, this trend appeared. And they emerge early in development. And there are similar patterns in sexual fantasy content as well. So some researchers would describe women as sexual gatekeepers in economic models of mating. And that's another can of worms, positioning intimacy and mating behavior through economic models. My personal thought is yes, it simplifies the concept, but because it's simplified, it's also oversimplified. Like, can you really reduce mating behavior, sexual intimacy in economic language, like supply versus demand? Can you really reduce that? So, going back, individual variation is enormous within each gender. And of course, cultural factors strongly influence how sexuality is expressed. And you can also observe there are historical changes in sexual norms that affect both genders. So, what could be sexual norms in the 1900s is different from the 21st century, and it changes. So, in this next slide, I will let you see a 3-minute video about Iceland's unique way of teaching their garden uh, preschool kids. So I'll let you watch this video.
Iceland is often considered a great country to be a woman because it tops world rankings when it comes to gender parity. But it's also a country with persistently high rates of gender-based violence, with about 40% of women subjected to physical and sexual violence, significantly higher than the global average. For BBC 100 Women, our gender and identity correspondent Sofia Betitsa takes a look at the problem.
Iceland has ranked as the most gender-equal country in the world for the last 15 years. One of the secrets to their success: start early.
At this nursery, the girls and the boys are separated, and they're encouraged to do things that are normally associated with the opposite sex.
The girls are taught to be unapologetic and fierce. While the boys are getting in touch with their caring side. The idea is that they develop their personalities without the constraints of conventional gender stereotypes. Iceland became the first country in the world to make it illegal to pay men more than women for the same job. And this push for equality also applies in the home. Parental leave here is 12 months. The mother and the father can split it equally. That's what Katrin and Fanna are doing. They have 5 kids.
Have you ever felt, oh, if I get pregnant, things will be hard for me at work?
No, never. I've never felt like pressure of not having kids because of my career.
90% of all fathers take paternity leave. Research shows that after going back to work, they continue to be significantly more involved.
When do you think that Iceland will close the gender gap?
My ambition is for Iceland to be first to close the gender gap, and hopefully by 2030.
But are things as perfect as they seem?
We have been marketed as this feminist paradise, which we are not. At home, we are not any more safe than women anywhere else. And in Europe.
We're at a vigil to remember all the Icelandic women who have been killed by men. It just shows that even in a country that is supposed to be a great place for women, things are far from perfect.
About 40% of Icelandic women have been subjected to physical or sexual violence, and because of that, the Icelandic state is being sued for misogyny.
We thought it was completely unacceptable that women were not taken seriously, and we decided to use the European Court of Human Rights to sue the Icelandic state. Now we are just crossing our fingers that we will win.
Do you think that the government is doing enough to tackle the issue of gender violence?
No, I don't think any government is doing enough. As long as there's gender-based violence, we're not doing enough. It's as simple as that.
After watching the video, I will leave a question for you to formulate on your own. Kining mga sexuality difference, they appear consistently across cultures and also historical periods. So how might we distinguish between biological predispositions na differences and cultural influences in shaping sexual behavior and attitudes? Okay, so we're almost done and we're gonna tie everything that we've discussed. First, starting with the nature and nurture sa gender development. Ang gender development, it involves both biological and cultural influences that they're working together. And evolutionary psychology suggests different mating strategies led to different behavioral tendencies. And this is also supported by cross-cultural research. Ang hormones, like testosterone, it influence development. But culture is also equally powerful. We've seen dramatic changes to gender roles within decades, not centuries, just 10 years. And these rapid historical changes and cross-cultural variations show na biology doesn't determine our fate. As one researcher put it, plus, no, time bends the genders. Ang key aning tanan is integration. Biology and culture interact dynamically through mechanisms like epigenetics. So surprisingly, also, peer influence matters more than parental influence for personality development, especially among teenagers and young adults. But again, we're not just passive recipients of these influences. We actively choose and create our social environments. And we respond to situations uniquely. We select environments that fit us, and our expectations often become self fulfilling. Understanding these powerful influences doesn't eliminate personal agency, it helps us understand how we can more effectively shape our own development. So, let me pull together what we've covered today. Humans show both universal patterns and enormous diversity. Gender similarities far outweigh differences, and both evolutionary and cultural factors influence behavior. Biology and culture interact dynamically, and they don't compete, they interact dynamically. And we are active agents in creating our social worlds. We're not passive tumbleweeds. And here's how it all fits together: genes provide biological foundations and constraints, culture provides specific content and expressions, individual agency allows resistance, choice, and change, peer groups transmit and modify cultural patterns, and situations and persons continuously interact. For gender specifically class, differences may decrease as roles become more equal, but some differences may persist due to biological influences. Individual variation is always greater than group differences, and there are multiple pathways to the same outcomes. Ang bottom line ani is we need neither biological determinism nor cultural relativism. Biological determinism, remember, kind of like psychoanalysis, na where our past determine our current, present, and future behavior. We don't do that. We also don't do cultural relativism. Now, kung sa laingon sa culture nga nagidata, are we really just all shaped by cultural influences, social influences? We don't have a mind of our own. Pero that's very important to keep in mind. There is a complex interaction requiring a lot of levels of analysis. So we need to understand both similarities and differences, while also appreciating both constraints and possibilities. And we've taken quite a journey today. So from universal human nature to cultural diversity, from overwhelming gender similarities to specific differences, from competing explanations to integrated understanding, and from seeing ourselves as passive recipients to recognizing we're active creators of culture. Let me end this lecture by saying this one last thing. Human nature is both universal and diverse, both constrained and flexible, and we are the products of both our evolutionary heritage and our cultural creativity. Understanding these complex interactions, class, rather than oversimplifying it, is the key to understanding ourselves and our potential for positive change. And that ends my lecture here. Thank you for listening, class, and as always, have fun learning.